Top 10 Best Simpsons Episodes. While it's clear The Simpsons has lost its unique charm over the years, there's no denying that the early seasons were some of the funniest pieces of animation the world has ever received. I personally don't dislike the later episodes of The Simpsons, I just think they don't hold up to the high standard that was set by the earlier seasons. There are still amazing episodes of The Simpsons being made, but they are far less common than the first 10 seasons, which consistently was amazing. Since I think most episodes between seasons 4 to 8 were amazing, it made this list very hard to make. So do not be shocked if one of your favourite episodes isn't on this list. Chances are I did like the episode, I just preferred these ones. Though it's highly unlikely any episodes from season 28 or later will make the list, I will say I am only allowing seasons 27 and earlier a chance to make the list since season 28 is still airing episodes. A couple other rules for this list: I will not be including the Simpsons movie, which should be obvious since it's a movie and not an episode, and I will only be including one Treehouse of Horror episode, which will be my favourite Treehouse of Horror episode, since otherwise it would probably take up multiple slots. Number 10. The Springfield Files. The Springfield Files is an episode of The Simpsons unlike any other. While lots of Simpsons episodes have random weird jokes thrown in there, this episode has the jokes revolve around the weirdness that is the plot. This episode starts with Leonard Nimoy narrating, and straight away you know this episode is going to stand out. Since Homer is too drunk to drive home, he decides to walk, and on the way he thinks he sees an alien in the woods. To help him figure out what happened on that night, Homer ends up getting help from Scully and Mulder from the X-Files. With the exception of Bart, nobody in town believes Homer about the alien, until he is able to get footage of the alien. Since Homer manages to get the footage of the alien, the whole town starts looking for the alien in the woods. The town tries to find the alien, and they eventually do. But it turns out that the alien was actually Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns only looked and sounded like an alien because he has procedures done to him once a week to extend his life. The reason Mr. Burns was glowing was because he's been working at the power plant for so long. The reveal of Mr. Burns in this episode is definitely my favourite moment in this episode, since it has groundskeeper Willie say, "Aw, it's Mr. Burns, kill it." The whole episode is just weird and even eerie in some parts. Homer walking through the woods on his own at night and meeting the so-called alien was actually creepy to watch, even if they put jokes in there. The weirdness doesn't just stop with the alien. There are other weird moments, such as Jasper growing his hair out like a yeti. Jasper growing his hair out like a yeti wouldn't fit in any other episode, but it fit in this one really well. Like almost all episodes from seasons 4 to 8 of The Simpsons, there are some standout moments that I will remember forever. Chief Wiggum using the invisible typewriter and Homer on the lie detector, as well as the before mentioned Willie scene, are all unforgettable moments. Unfortunately, I can't go into detail about if the episode had many X-Files references, as I haven't seen the show. This is the weirdest early season Simpsons episode that uses the typical structure of a Simpsons episode. If I was going by overall most different, that'd probably go to 22 short films about Springfield. This episode being as weird as it is definitely a good thing, as it makes the episode feel really unique, and it still manages to keep the typical Simpsons comedy in there. Number 9. Homer the Great. In Homer the Great, we get introduced to a group called the Stonecutters, and the members get some advantages in life. It's usually small advantages, such as a better parking space or a comfier chair. Homer becomes the most hated member when joining, as he destroys the group's sacred parchment. Quickly after this, however, they discover that Homer has a special birthmark that causes him to become the most powerful member. Homer likes the power at first, but it starts to annoy and upset him since he doesn't feel challenged or equal. When Homer starts to use his power for good, the group hates him, enough so that they make a group called No Homers, which is a great callback to earlier in the episode. I thought it was really interesting seeing which members of Springfield were also members of the Stonecutters. I also really liked seeing how the number/ranking system worked in this episode. Seeing Lenny and Carl both be more powerful than Mr. Burns was really funny, and with the way they treat him, I wouldn't be shocked if it causes Mr. Burns to be more cruel to them at the plant, causing a kind of cycle of cruelness between the three of them. The best moments in this episode are the No Homers joke, Homer's requirements to join the Stonecutters, and without a doubt the best moment in this episode is easily the song. It's just so freaking catchy and funny. It's easily one of my favourite Simpsons songs. I loved seeing Patrick Stewart as number 1. The man is hilarious as the leader. Patrick Stewart's voice made the character's lines even more awesome than anybody else could pull off. Number 8. Homer the Smithers. Homer the Smithers is funny, really funny, and there isn't much more to the episode than that, but there doesn't need to be. There's something at least mildly amusing happening every 20 seconds, and that's impressive. Homer becomes Mr. Burns' assistant while Smithers is away on vacation. Homer and Mr. Burns are really funny together, and this episode has the two characters together for almost the whole episode. The pacing for this episode is really fast considering not much happens overall. A huge amount of time in this episode is dedicated to Homer doing tasks for Mr. Burns, and mix that with the fast pacing and you get a nearly infinitely rewatchable episode. Homer finally snapping at Mr. Burns after all these years was good to see, and I'm shocked at how Mr. Burns responded to it all. After that happened, I expected Mr. Burns to try to kill Homer for the rest of the episode, but instead of doing that, they decided to let Mr. Burns take care of himself. I like how Smithers sent Homer a gift basket for almost killing Mr. Burns at the end of the episode, since it got Smithers his job back. Number 7. Kingsize Homer. I know I'm probably going to say this about most of the entries on the list, but Kingsize Homer is on the list solely because of how funny it is. Homer gains a lot of weight so that he can be classed as disabled so that he can work from home. Everything is good for Homer at first, but he starts to feel discriminated against because of his weight, and Marge tells him that she doesn't find him attractive anymore. When Homer doesn't want to do any of his work, he leaves the water bird in charge, which doesn't go as planned as the bird mysteriously falls over. I'm assuming the bird fell over on its own, although it'd make more sense if someone knocked it over. When Homer gets back home, he discovers that the plant is going to explode and that it's up to him to save it. Homer ends up saving the plant using his weight, and Lisa points out the irony in that, and Bart gets a good line saying, "And I think it's ironic that for once Dad's butt prevented the release of toxic gas." I usually hate fart jokes, just in general, but I actually thought that line was pretty funny. As a reward, Mr. Burns tries to help Homer lose the weight by exercising with him, but since Homer's so bad at it, Mr. Burns just pays for liposuction surgery instead, which is a great joke to end the episode on since the whole episode started with Homer not wanting to do exercise. Homer trying to gain weight is surprisingly funny to watch, and I think if any other show tried to do this plot and tried to make it funny, that they'd fail and they'd just make it uncomfortable to watch. Like every episode on this list, this episode has tons of hilarious moments. My favourite moments in this episode are the fish sandwich, press the any key, and the answering machine saying, "Please mash the keypad with your palm, now." There's other great moments too, like the Ralph moment, but pretty much any moment with Ralph is a great moment. I'm glad the episode didn't put too much focus on Marge being uncomfortable with Homer's weight and instead took a humorous approach. That being said, Marge does express her concern, which is necessary, but it doesn't take away from the overall tone the episode has, which is good. I know it's only a small moment, but I thought Maggie giving Homer the fake donut was incredibly sweet and funny at the same time. Number 6. Treehouse of Horror 5. I've probably just annoyed a lot of people by putting my favourite Treehouse of Horror episode lower than the top 3 slots on this list. I'm not a big fan of horror movies, and I haven't seen many. That being said, I usually get the jokes in the Treehouse of Horror episodes because they use the more iconic moments from the things they are parodying. I like how the opening credits in the Treehouse of Horror episodes changed the people who worked on the episode's names to be something more horror related. The first story segment in the episode is a parody of The Shining, or as groundskeeper Willie calls it, The Shinning. I'm saying this right now, I have not seen The Shining, so I might not get all of the jokes in this episode. But like I said earlier, The Simpsons tends to use the more iconic moments, so I'm pretty sure I got most of the jokes. As someone who hasn't seen the movie but knows the more iconic moments, I can still safely say that this segment is hilarious. This segment is one of, if not the best segments in Treehouse of Horror history. My favourite moments in this segment include, but are not limited to, the "Here's Johnny" joke, Moe telling Homer to kill his family, Homer saying "Don't mind if I do," and Marge saying "We'll just have to wait and see." In the second segment, Homer creates a time machine out of a toaster, something so stupidly smart that only Homer Simpson could do it. Homer goes back in time to when dinosaurs still existed, but of course when he comes back to present time, everything's changed. When back in present time, Homer is horrified to find out that Flanders is dictator of the world. I like how the writers always seem to make Ned some sort of villain in the Treehouse of Horror episodes. Whether it be him being the devil or, well, evil dictator of the world, he always seems to have some sort of villainous role to play. It is incredibly creepy to see Ned forcing people to get lobotomies, although the idea of lobotomies alone creeps me out, but it definitely doesn't help that Flanders is the one giving them out. Homer runs away so that he doesn't have to get a lobotomy, and is chased by dogs, but Homer gets away from the dogs by eating sausages instead of, actually giving the dogs the sausages. This is easily my favourite moment of this segment. Homer keeps on going back in time, but he keeps on messing everything up again. I love when Homer causes all of the dinosaurs to go extinct. He's rewarded with the best reality he could possibly imagine, only to leave soon after getting there, thinking they don't have donuts, but in reality it rains donuts. After going back in time again and again and again, Homer ends up settling on a reality where his family has lizard tongues. Segment 3 of this episode targets cannibalism. Yay! This segment is usually classed as the weakest of the bunch, but I still really enjoyed it, and I don't actually know which segment I like the most. The Shining is the obvious answer, and it's probably objectively the best segment in Treehouse of Horror history, but I don't actually know which my favourite is. This is easily the creepiest segment in this episode, but that should be expected since they're tackling cannibalism. This whole segment has a really creepy atmosphere, and listening to Jimbo get eaten was uncomfortably funny to watch. I like that the school called the food they were serving the next day Sloppy Jimbo. It's as if they weren't even trying to hide it, and instead were trying to put fear into the kids. I like when shows have a funny recurring joke throughout an episode. This episode has Willie being killed in each segment. The episode ends with Bart waking up and there's this fog that turns the family's skin inside out and they start singing and of course Willie joins in mid-song. It's very random, but it's also very funny. This is my favourite Treehouse of Horror episode as a whole, which should be obvious as I said there'd only be one on the list and this is the one on the list and the one on the list would be my favourite. But yeah, the reason this Treehouse of Horror episode made it on the list above the rest is just because I find it funnier. And usually in the Treehouse of Horror episodes, you have a clearly strongest and weakest segment. This episode didn't have that. They were all really strong. Number 5, 22 short films about Springfield. 22 short films about Springfield is easily one of the most unique Simpsons episodes. It is somehow incredibly funny despite how little time we actually get with each character. I like how the characters' stories all loosely connect. For example, a bee will be following Lisa, but then will go and sting Smithers, who will get an allergic reaction, who then goes to the hospital, at which point we will follow Dr. Nick. The way everything in this episode transitions is really smooth and really well done. Everything somehow feels connected, and yet its own thing at the same time. I like how the writers didn't just pick major characters or minor characters to revolve stories around, and instead we get a mixture of each. Homer gets a story, but so does Bumblebee Man, and this was definitely a risk for the writers, but it definitely paid off. I think the best segment is easily the Skinners and Chalmers one, although I'd say the Cletus story is probably second best. One of the first things I think of when I think of this episode is the extremely tall guy with the weird voice. Everything he says is extremely memorable and extremely funny. This episode could have been a big mess, but thanks to the way the scenes transition, it's become one of the best episodes of the TV series. Number 4, The City of New York versus Homer Simpson. What makes Homer getting angry so funny and enjoyable to watch? That is a genuine question, as I'm really not too sure. This episode has Homer getting screwed over almost to no end. First, his car gets stolen. Then, he has to go to New York because his stolen car got impounded. And then he has to wait for someone to show up at his impounded car, but he misses them. These are only some of the examples of Homer getting screwed over in this episode. The only part of the episode where Homer's actually enjoying himself is right at the beginning, which is what causes him to get screwed over in the future. You could say Homer doesn't deserve the amount of abuse he gets in this episode, but he wasn't exactly nice to Barney at the beginning of the episode. Does he deserve it? In my opinion, he deserves some of the abuse, but not all of it. Homer being a jerk to Barney at the beginning of the episode makes me feel not quite as bad for Homer. Most of the humour in this episode comes from Homer getting progressively more angry. The episode does a great job of making you feel like the city of New York actually hates Homer. Even though most of the episode just has Homer sitting next to his impounded car, it still feels like the episode's moving at a really quick pace. There isn't much more I can say about the episode other than if you love seeing Homer get angry, you'll probably love this episode. Number 3, Homer at the bat. Using celebrities in The Simpsons doesn't always work out for the best. Lisa goes gaga. During the earlier seasons of The Simpsons though, I can't really think of any celebrity appearance that really annoyed me, and I think that might be because most of the celebrity appearances were quite brief. This episode has the celebrities playing themselves, and the focus is on the celebrities, and yet that's what makes the episode so amazing. I'm actually somewhat shocked that this is a season 3 episode. Not that season 3 is bad, but I think the show was at its peak during seasons 4 to 8, so this episode is an early gem in my mind. Homer and the rest of the plant workers get kicked off the softball team after Mr. Burns hires professional baseball players to win a bet. The best thing about this episode is seeing each of the ridiculous reasons the baseball players couldn't make it to the most important game. In the end, Homer does end up winning the game for everyone, in the classic Simpsons fashion of winning but losing at the same time. My only real problem with this episode is Wiggum's voice during the earlier seasons, but that's a very minor complaint. I hate when people say try 110%, so I'm glad the episode made fun of that. Not much more I can say about the episode other than just listing jokes for the sake of listing them. Number 2, Raging Abe Simpson and his grumbling grandson in The Curse of the Flying Hellfish. I'm guessing that out of all of the entries on this list, this was probably the most shocking to see, especially this high. Abe is one of my favourite characters, and especially in the later seasons, he tends to become the highlight of the episodes that he's in. All of the stories that he tells everyone are just so interesting, since they're just completely random most of the time. This episode has a different tone than most. It starts almost completely comedic like any other episode, but later on it gets really dark, but with bits of comedy sprinkled in. We discover that Abe and Mr. Burns are a part of a bet, where the last surviving member of the Hellfish get to keep some old expensive paintings. Mr. Burns and Grandpa are the last surviving members. The Hellfish are Grandpa's and Burns' old army buddies. Mr. Burns, being the horrible person that he is, tries to kill Grandpa so that he's guaranteed the paintings. He hires an assassin who constantly fails to kill Abe, sometimes due to Abe's stupidity, sometimes due to his smarts. After he convinces him that Mr. Burns really is trying to kill him, Abe teams up with Bart and tries to collect the treasure before Burns can. They travel to sea, which leads to a chase scene between Burns and Abe. Abe and Bart eventually defeat Mr. Burns and get the treasure, only for it to be taken away from them moments later by the rightful owner. Even though the paintings got taken away from him, it was still nice to see Grandpa make Burns squirm. This episode is a lot darker than most Simpsons episodes, especially the scene where Burns flat out tries to kill Bart by pushing him into the water. The animation in this episode is a lot better than a normal Simpsons episode. Not saying a normal Simpsons episode is poorly animated, but it's really noticeable how much better it is in this one. The colour choices were great for setting up a dark atmosphere, and the way everything was shaded was perfect for the old Simpsons animation style. This episode is definitely the most underrated on this list, but if you don't like darker episodes of TV shows, then I understand why you wouldn't like this episode. If you don't like darker episodes of TV shows, then you probably won't like this episode, and you also probably won't like my number one. Honourable mention, Eternal Moonshine of The Simpsons Mind. This is one of the best later season episodes, and possibly my favourite modern episode, modern being after season 10. It has a mystery element, lots of great jokes, and great animation, and if this was a list of my favourite modern Simpsons episodes, then this would easily make it onto it. Number 1. Homer's Enemy. I know there's lots of people that don't like this episode, and I think I know partially why. I think the main reason people might not like this episode is because of the ending. The ending to this episode is incredibly cruel to Frank Grimes, but it's the ending that makes me love this episode the amount that I do. Dark humour really doesn't bother me, and when it's done well, it can be really funny. The two episodes I always think of from any show where dark humour is done right is this episode and Scott Tenorman Must Die from South Park, but I actually like the former more than the latter. This episode shows how you can be completely incompetent but get far in life, and be good at everything you do and get nowhere and get punished for it. Frank constantly calls Homer out on his flaws, but nobody listens to him. Homer tries to make peace with Grimy by having him over for dinner, but after Frank discovers how good Homer's life's been, he just gets more angry. Frank goes as far as to trick Homer into entering a children's contest, but after Homer wins, it angers Frank even more. Eventually, Grimy goes insane and actually electrocutes himself, causing his own demise. Even at Frank's funeral, everyone is more interested in Homer, even when he is just sleeping. There's also a small side plot with Bart owning a factory, and I don't think it's anything particularly special, but it helps express how good Homer's life has been in the main plot. Eventually the factory falls, and that side of the story just ends, but it being as anticlimactic as it was actually really funny. You could say that Homer's a jerk in this episode, and he kind of is, but I don't think that he was intentionally trying to hurt Frank, and was instead just being incredibly stupid. There is a scene where Homer takes his pencils, but I don't think Homer thought it was that bad taking them. I love that Homer tells Frank about his life, and especially love that Homer's so shocked to find out that Grimy hasn't been to space. As you can probably tell, I love that Homer calls Frank Grimes grimy. Like I said earlier, I think I might understand why you might not like this episode, but for me personally, it's my all-time favourite Simpsons episode, and I say all-time because I know this won't change. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and be sure to write your favourite episodes in the comments, as it does interest me seeing which episodes other people loved.